Welcome to another episode of the Svarim Chatter podcast. I'm Nachi Weinstein. This episode of the podcast is sponsored by the Virtual Halacha Program. The program gives you the structure and clarity to truly master Halacha B'Iyun. Each week, you'll receive carefully prepared Maramakamis, Shiurim from Rav Ami Merzel Shlita, clear summaries and review, all under the guidance of Rabbi Victor Nebetzal Shlita. Right after Sukkos, the program is beginning 2 new cycles, Hilchos Shabbos in Orach Chaim and Hilchos Niddah in Yoreh Deah. If you've been waiting for the perfect time to join, this is it. Try it today with a free 30-day trial at vhalacha.com. That's vhalacha.com, and you can find that link in the show notes. To sponsor an episode of the podcast or to support the podcast, please email me svarimchatter@gmail.com. You can find link and information in the show notes. You can also find a link to subscribe to the Svarim Chatter WhatsApp community, where I post new books, new Svarim, book deals, and so on, as well as the Svarim Chatter WhatsApp status, which is more of the same. And if you can also subscribe and rate and review the podcast wherever it is that you listen. And finally, a programming note, this will be the last episode until after Sukkos, and the podcast will be back after Sukkos. So with that, enjoy this episode, and wishing everyone a good Yom Tov. Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of the Svarim Chatter podcast. On this episode of the podcast, I'm going to be joined once again by Rabbi Ahron Notis, who is the mechaber of the Sefer Chikri Ahron, and more well known as the author of the Great Zmanim debate, which was featured here on Svarim Chatter, as well as the author of the brand new book, Sefer, the Great Shiurim debate, the history, the archaeology, and the lumdus. So first I want to start off by mentioning that this episode of the podcast is sponsored by the Lincoln Square Synagogue on the Upper West Side of Manhattan in honor of Svarim Chatter. It is also sponsored for the yard side of Harry Schwartz, Chaim Yehuda ben Moshe Avram, by Ben and Megan Schwartz, and also Le'ila Nishmas, Rav Baruch Tzvi ben Ruvei Nassan, Rabbi Dr. Brian Galbert. So thank you to the sponsors for sponsoring, and thank you, Rabbi Notis, for joining me on the podcast once again, this time to discuss Shiurim and the Great Shiurim debate, as you will.
Thank you, Nachi. My pleasure. That was the last podcast we did together. I got great feedback from. I'm really excited to do another one.
Yes, Baruch Hashem. I also got a lot of feedback, and I saw that you sold many copies of the book, Baruch Hashem, so that one went over very well. So now we're going to dive right into Shiurim, a interesting topic, and it's also interesting for this time of the year. Things come up. It's negeh for somewhat for Yom Kippur. It's negeh for Sukkos, especially. So we'll get into some of that for the relevant things now, as well as, in general, various different things about Shiurim. So
every Shabbos, every day. You know?
Yeah. No, I'm saying specifically also for this time of the year. Absolutely. It's negeh all the time. So why did you decide? I don't remember if we discussed this at the end of the last episode, but why did you decide to go from Zmanim to Shiurim? You're going to write a book now on Shiurim.
Okay, well, one of the reasons that the Zmanim was such a big success, it sold a lot more than I thought. I got really amazing feedback, was because it's a confusing topic that's very relevant. It's relevant all the time, Zman, and it's very confusing. On one hand, people feel that let's just be machmer. There's so many different opinions. So Shabbos or this, or just wait the longest, so they're machmer the latest. But then Paiskim have a problem with that, because you can't just, if you want to be machmer, it's fine. But if you're a Paisik and someone wants to know the halacha, and a lot of times it's difficult for them to wait the longest man, he goes to Rav and he goes, what is the Ikar halacha? How, I have a problem. My father needs me, my mother needs me. I have to catch a plane. I need, what is the Ikar halacha? What is, so a Paisik can't just be machmer. And also a lot of just regular people, they get to the point that it bothers them that Tzeis HaKolim is not when the stars come out. And Aleis Shachar is just not when it gets light in the morning. And it's not real. So it's very confusing, and it's very relevant. And so it came out, and people are like intimidated. It's really a hard topic to just sit down and learn it and get to the bottom of it. But my book made that available. It made it accessible to people. It's not easy reading, but if someone wants to know it, you can sit down and find out, what is this about the degrees? Why do we do about degrees? What is it? What does it mean? They could get through the confusion, and they know it just enlightens them. So that was a big hit. Now I got a lot of feedback from that, and there's one more topic really that's similar to that, that's relevant all the time, and it's very confusing. And that's Shiurim. And people are say, okay, there's the big Shiurim, the Chazon Ish Shir, and so I'll just be machmer. I'll eat half a matzah, 3/4 of a matzah. I'll buy myself a huge kais. Okay, that's fine if you want to be machmer. But Paiskim have to paskin. It's not. There are people want to know what's the ikar din, and it's a very difficult topic. And it's the same. A lot of regular people also have the same, frustration that a kazayas can't be the size of a can of olives. It just can't be. An amma can't be way bigger than a forearm. It just can't be. So it's very confusing. So on one hand, what is the truth? So it's very hard to get to the bottom of it. What's the source? Where does it come from? This big shiurim. What's the reason why we get sort of unrealistic, our shiurim? And you have to really delve through a lot of difficult svarim. So we tried to do that again, to get the whole story, go through the svarim, what are the arguments, what's the proofs, analyze what's the proofs, what's the counter proofs, what do we really know? And again, it's something that we really learned a lot about in the last couple of generations. And we really, the Talmidei Chacham have really sorted out a lot of the confusion. So it's similar to the last to the Zemanim Sefer, and the fact that it enables a person to sit down and go through the whole issue. Where do we end up with this? What happened over here? Where do we end up with this big shiurim? And what's the truth of the matter?
Okay, so similarly to the last Sefer, you did something which is you laid out in the beginning first the history, kind of the overview, terminology, things like that, and then you dive into the great debate, if you will, the different opinions. And then you'll have a final section of, not a final, some other things, but archaeology and some other sections, so we'll get into. So, first you label it, the first section, the Rambam Shiurim, and you go through historical Shiurim and things that many people are familiar with. A shekel, a dinar, Yerushalayim shekel, and different coins of Ben, Revius, Amma, Kazayas. Let's get into some of those things. But I do want to start, before we start off with the historical Shiurim, just a general question I think is very relevant. Something that's a little different than Zmanim is using archaeology and history. I know your section archaeology is much later in the book, but I want to write here at the beginning, how does one approach that, taking history? Now we have so many archaeologies uncovered. We have many coins and shkalim from different tkufas. You can actually go and buy the coins, own the coins, see the coins. How do we actually, sometimes you mentioned Kazayas and how big it is. Someone was mentioning, well, you don't know, a Zayas used to be this big and used to be this small. You go to different places, Zayas are smaller, but the shekel, the shkalim, we have some of the shkalim from different periods. We actually have the shekel now. So how does one incorporate archaeology, practical historical data, and archaeology with halacha?
Okay, that's a good question. Well, I think there's two parts to this. The first is the coins. Now, the coins, all this if you let's say Pidyon Ben. If you want to learn, you open up the Shulchan Aruch, learn Hilchos Pidyon Ben. So it says what is the shear of a shekel, but the Ramaz brings a couple opinions, and the Beis Yosef brings, and they all quote the shear in the size of relative to the coins that was in their period. So you have many Rishonim all through the generations that give the shear of Pidyon Ben in coins. But if a regular Talmid Chacham takes out a Shulchan Aruch and takes out the Rishonim and the Mordechai and the Maril, and he sees that how many ducats it is, and what is he going to do with that? Right? So it's full of coins. Now, the problem is that if you just go to the Eitzes Farm and you'll find out all the Rishonim say different coins, it doesn't get you anywhere. So nowadays, we actually could find those coins. Today, it's like an information age. It's what was difficult to find out once upon a time. Today, you could actually find out the truth. So this is not really archaeology. This is if the Shulchan Aruch, if the Beis Yosef says a shear in dram, and what's a dram? If there's a shear that's given in ducats or Arab gold dinars, so we actually could get a ducat and a florence and a gold dinar and the many of the Sefer goes through all the different coins that are brought in Rishonim and Ga'ainim and early Achrayim and coins and weight, different weights and volumes. But you just need to do research to find out what they are. It's possible today to research them. You can actually see the coin. The Ramban describes a coin different coins that he saw. So, well, what is it going to get anyone until nowadays? But nowadays, if the coin is described, we can find those coins in museums, they're in collections, they're written about, people study them. So there's not really archaeology. This is just what does it say in the Ramban? What does it say in the Magen Avraham and in the Shach? They say pints and they say coins. Just let's find out what those coins were. So that's not really. There's nothing questionable about that. If the Rishonim say how many ducats from Venice, they give a shear in ducats from Venice, and you have a ducat from Venice from the period that they lived. So you know what he's saying. There's nothing to question about that. Then there's another part of it is we could deduce the size of an Amma, let's say from the walls of a Harbayas, from the Siloam tunnel, things like that. And there's all artifacts. So people might wonder, maybe that's archaeology. And the truth is that a lot of like Yediyas from archaeology, you have to stop and question because they need interpretation. You'll find something, archaeologists say this and this, and they build it on something. Well, there's a lot of interpretation that went into that. So you can't just take their word for it. So, for example, I'll tell you an example issue, and that's not written in the book, but I found that a number of articles from archaeologists who concluded what was the shear of a shekel used in Bayis Rishon. So Bayis Sheni we have coins. Bayis Rishon we don't have coins from, but from weights. But when I looked into it, I realized, how do they know this? They all basically are built on that somebody found two little weights in Yerushalayim that said on it shekel or half a shekel. And it's not a coin. Now, who says that's the weight of the machzas shekel? Who says that's the halachic shekel? Shekel means a weight. There was weights that were used for different items and different people might have used for different things. Doesn't prove anything really. You can't prove from, that takes interpretation. Say, well, what was this used for? It was probably used for weighing the silver for machzas shekel. Well, who says? So you can't just take archaeology, just take an article from archaeologists and prove something. But there are hard, real, tangible things you can look at and analyze it yourself and see it's inescapable that this proves something. So, and in this particular topic, the first people that, or the proof from archaeology that's in the Sefer, well, the Chazon Ish, the Stipler was looking for this, right? The Stipler wrote about trying to find the Harbayas, and some of the questions, the Stipler was, and there was. It comes from the archaeological proofs that are discussed in the Sefer that are analyzed by Talmidei Chacham were first brought up by Gedolei Yisrael, and again, you can't just you have to really rigorously see, is that a proof? And we go through, how much is it a proof? Sometimes it's not really 100% proof, but together with everything else, it's like, Dvarim Nikarim.
That's something that'll come up more, especially as we get to archaeology. But let's start off at the beginning, the first section, the Rambam Shiurim, and you go through historical Shiurim, and you give the overview. So let's start off with that, and then also some of the key terminology, as you already mentioned at the beginning, shkolim, dinar, revi'is, all the basic terms that this is, again, similar to what we did in the last time, but the Zmanim one, with the basic concepts and terms.
Well, actually, it's interesting, when you say similar to the last one, people that went through the Zmanim Sefer, besides the Sugya Zmanim, they feel they can learn so many Sugyas in Gemara better because now they understand what mazalis are. They know what Galgal Chama. They know so many terms in Gemara that they just, when they learned it, they just said, "Oh, nobody knows what this is," and then they kept going. They thought it was like we would do to Dikduk Rashi or something. But it's the same thing with the Shiurim Sefer. It was so the Gemara is full of dinar and a shekel and an isser and a mo and shtei kasef, and a lot of times most people just learn it. It means nothing to them. It doesn't mean anything to them. It's not real. But if you study it and you understand what is a dinar, what is a shekel, what's a mo, how much does it weigh, how much was it worth, so why is like the Sefer explains, why is a ksuba 200 dinar? What was the value at the time of Chazal 200 dinar? So when you finish the Sefer, besides the Sugya Shiurim, you actually understand a lot of Sugyas in Gemara better, just from just because you really become familiar with coins and weights and measurements.
Okay, so do you want to explain some of the terms and some of the basic things that words and definitions that we're going to get involved with throughout the topic?
Okay, well, actually, chapter 2. Let's just quickly. I'll just mention quickly what the first chapter we start off with. It discusses like an overview of why this is such a, in the modern times, Shiurim are such a struggle. Once upon a time, people, the shear of a kabeya was an egg, and the shear of a gazayas was an olive, and the shear of an amma was a forearm, and a tufa was a hand, and it wasn't such a big issue. Except we'll see later, a shekel was in the time of Rishonim already an issue. But today, it's a particular issue. First of all, obviously, we all know that Tzlach said he had the shear of a kabeya, of a revius, measure with thumbs and measure with eggs don't stim. So it must be something changed. But besides that, there's lots of reason to believe that the eggs today are not necessarily the eggs they used to be, and a lot of the things today are not the same size they used to be. Things in modern times have changed, so that's why today we can't just. It's not so we can't just say, okay, take an egg and measure it, which was what they did all the time. We have to stop and wonder: did things change? How much did they change? How did they change? What was it? And if it did change, what do we do about it? That's why Shiurim became such a big issue. Now, after presenting that, the second chapter talks about a shekel. And now, the shekel, we know that we have a very clear definition of a shekel from many Gaonim and early Rishonim. They say exactly what a shekel is. How do they know what a shekel is? And they define a shekel. The Rambam writes, and many Gaonim write. It's not in Gemara, but the Gaonim write and the Rambam write. The shekel is 382 sa'iris. 302. The weight of 300. The weight of a shekel is the weight of 382 barley kernels. So how do they know that? And the answer is that it says it in the Chumash. I mean, together they also were mice. What it says in the Chumash, it really equals 320. But the Torah says that a shekel is esrim geira. Well, nowadays it doesn't mean much to us. Oh, what's a geira? That pasuk doesn't inform us anything. But for a long, long time, that was a very informative pasuk because they knew what a geira was. A geira was a basic unit that the Gemara says it was called a mo in Aramaic. And in Roman times, it was called an obel, and the Persians and the Gaonim called it a danka. And it was a known unit of weight. They knew what a geira was. And a geira had a definition. A geira was 4 charuvim. And a charuv had a definition. It was 4 sa'iris. So this was international. This wasn't, the Torah says esrim geira. For 1,000 years, that informed people what a shekel was. Oh, it's 20 geira. Everyone knew what it was. It was a standard unit of weight that had different names, but was recognized all over the world. And it was a small unit of weight used for precious metal and spices, things, very expensive things, were weighed in geira, obel, mo, danka. It's all the same thing. And by definition, today we think of things in grams or ounces. Obviously, that's not how they thought of it. A geira was defined as 4 carob seeds, and a carob seed was defined as 4 sa'iris, for barley kernels. And that's actually how people weighed it. When you wanted to buy or sell the items like this, it was bought or sold on a balance scale. And on one side of the balance scale, they could put carob seeds or barley kernels, and the other side, the spices or the silver that you're buying. So at the time of the Gaonim, this was known. They knew what a geira was, and they knew that what esrim geira is. Now, actually, like we explain in the book, that their definition of a shekel is a sixth more than the Torah's. The Gemara says in Bechara that they were meisiv for mitzvahs, where the shekel got bigger. They were meisiv shtus. So they know what a geir is. They know how many charuvim is and how many sa'iris it is, and they know, therefore, you add a sixth, how much it comes out to 382. And at the time of the Ga'inim, and even still in the time of the Rishonim, coins were minted in units of gera. Well, it wasn't maybe called a gera; it was called a danka, or it was called an obel, but they were minted in such units. So they knew they were able to convert it and say, okay, it's the same. It's the same as 4 Arab gold dinars. It's this many florences. This many European coins, because all these coins, the Greek coins, the European coins in those times, the Roman coins, even later European coins and Arab coins, they were minted in such units. So they didn't have to go ahead and weigh it to tell me that the shekel is this amount of ducats. They just knew the definition of a ducat in Gera. And so that's a big, just revelation of what the pasuk means, and how the Ga'inim and the Rishonim were able to knew what it is, able to convert it.
So the first section, as you label it, the Rambam Shiurim, which discusses some of the things we just finished discussing, but also it discusses also the Rambam and the Ga'inim's opinions and what we know of it now based on their different shiurim. So what can you tell the listener about the Rambam shiurim and length and volume? Because also that's like, I don't know if we mentioned that, by the way. When we talk about shiurim, we're not only talking about the size, right? There's length and volume. There's different
weight, length, and value, right?
Correct. They have a whole bunch. Right. We have to clarify.
And they're all
well.
intertwined, right?
Yes.
The reason they're intertwined is because the Rambam tells us the volume of a revius and the volume of Isarin for challah. The Rambam tells us it in weight of water. The Rambam says that a container that holds the weight of 17.5 dinar weight of water, that's the volume of a revius. So the Rambam is connecting the weight with the volume. Now, Rambam does explain that not every liquid, and even not water, might not necessarily always have the exact same value. One volume might not have exactly the same weight. But the Rambam explains all this, and the Rambam converts the way he expresses what is a revius of liquid and what is a volume of a omer. The Rambam says if you fill up a container with this weight of water, that container that holds that weight of water holds this volume. So we know the two of them connected. If we know weight, if we know the weight of a shekel, then we know the volume. And the Rambam also tells us, which the Gemara really connects. The Gemara tells us that 40 saw is 3 cubic amis. So we know from that the Gemara says that a revius is 2 etzbais by 2 etzbais by 2.7 etzbais. So if we know the volume, how much cubic centimeters or cubic inches is a revius or a saw, then we could deduce what must have been the etzba, what must have been the tefach and the amma. So they're all connected. So before we just go on from the weight, it is a very fascinating issue that modern people have been able to figure out. That there's a well-known debate, or there's a well-known, the Ramban writes that the Rashi and Ramban Chumash, the Rashi says what is the weight of a shekel. The Rashi converts it into gold coins that were in his time and into ounces, and the Ramban says that does not stem with the Ga'inim. The Ga'inim, all the Ga'inim that say that a shekel is 382 sa'iras, so those gold coins that the Rashi is talking about, that half ounce that Rashi is talking about, are less than the Ga'inim. And so the Ramban and Chumash seems to disagree with Rashi. He says the Ga'inim say not like that. He just assumes the Ga'inim knew better. And he says, well, Rashi must have made a mistake. he probably, the goldens Rashi talking about probably used to weigh more, and then they got less, and Rashi didn't realize that gold in his days didn't weigh as much. So the Ramban says Rashi must have made a mistake. But later, the Ramban, there's a famous letter from the Ramban when he came to Eretz Yisrael, that when he was in Akko, he actually found a shekel, a coin that said shekel Yisrael. The Ramban describes the coin, what it says on it, and what it looks like, what the picture is, and he weighed it, and now from that he figured out, and he said that from there he sees that Rashi was right, the Geonim were wrong. So there's a famous, issue that there's actually machlekes, even though we have so much a tradition from the Geonim on the weight. So many Geonim and the Rishonim tell us the weight of a shekel. Rashi seems to disagree with them, and the Ramban seems to have like what you would call archaeological proof. He had an actual coin, and you can't argue with that. And so he said this supports Rashi. So there's a very, very interesting issue. How could it even be that Rashi argued with them all and they were all wrong? The Geonim were wrong. And today we actually know what those coins is. We have those coins. We have the other coins. The Ramban says that were weighed the same as the gold Arabic dinar that the Geonim talked about. And we have solved this mystery. We know that the Geonim were right, and Rashi was describing the Esrim Gera, the shekel that weighed Esrim Gera. That was exactly the shekel that the Ramban saw. And we know when it was minted and why it was minted, what standard it was minted at, and what it was for. And that Rashi's definition it accords with that. But the Geonim say that at the time of the Gemara, they increased it by a sixth. And they're describing the increased the coins used during Bayis Sheni. Those were Greek coins, and that's where the increased accorded with the coins, the sloim that were used in Bayis Sheni. Those were bigger. We have those coins also. Those were bigger, and that's what the Geonim are talking about. And that's the halachic shekel. So there's isn't now we know. It's a pretty amazing story how today that we can look at those coins, we could see that actually Rashi was right and the Geonim were right, and there's it's not really a contradiction. There's the Torah's shekel and there's the increased shekel, and during that Chazal made during Bayis Sheni, and we have the coin and we sort of solved that. It's an amazing story. So okay, you can't go through the whole thing. You got to read the book, but we'll move on to once we could really clearly establish. We have all those coins today. This farm that Talmidei Chacham found those coins. We have, and we don't have to rely on those farm today. Anybody knows how to do a little research can find them, pictures of them, catalogs of them, and books about them, and articles about them. We know what all those coins that the Rishonim bring and the Geonim bring. We know what they weigh. We have no doubt today what the shekel was, and we know exactly when the Rambam says that a revius of liquid weighs a revius of water weighs 7.5 dinar. We know exactly what's that weight, what's that volume. And we know that what the Rambam says is, the Rambam said he himself measured it, and he came out with the shear, but we know that the Rambam also had a Messiah. With the shear that he came out with is the same pretty much as the Rif and the Rav Haigain and all the Geonim, Tshuvos HaGeonim, they all had the same shear revius. They all described the same shear. We know what the coins they used were, and we know that they described, and all the Geonim and Rishonim, they all said the same shear. That Raman made his own experiments, but they all came out with the same shear, and we know what it is. And so we know what a revius is, what a sarin is. There's no doubt about it. And we know the Rambam made his experiments he made a container. It tells us how many etzbais, and then how much it weighed. So once we know the dinar and we know the volume, so we could just calculate how big his etzbah was. And we know that the Rambam's amma is basically the forearm of an average person today. We know the Rambam's amma. And that's the Rambam's amma was the same amma and tefach as the Geonim. And so we today, when we say that, we call the Rambam Shiurim, because we know from the Rambam what a revius is, what a shekel shel Torah is, what's a revius, what's Isaron, what's all we know what's an Amma, what's a tefach. We know exactly what the Rambam is saying, but it's not really the Rambam's, because the Rambam it does describe his own experiments, but. Well, we have so many tshuvos from Ga'ainim and the Rif and the earlier Shainim. They all say exactly the same thing. So what we call the Rambam Shiurim today is really the Shiurim of the Ga'ainim and the Rishainim. And actually, we have the coins from Bias State. We have today. It's no question about it that the Rambam Shiurim were the Shiurim that were used by Chazal.
So that's what the Rambam. Section 2, you get into what you call the great debate. I think that's what everyone's waiting for. Where's the debate? That's your signature at this point after the great Zmanim debate, the great Shiurim debate. And also, we're already half an hour into the podcast. Everyone's like, Shiurim, it's Orach Chaim and Chazon Ish. What's going on? This is what we know. This is what we're here for. This is what we're waiting for. So, okay, let's first, before that, you have your introduction, you have the early Achronim. Let's start off there, ease our way in, and we'll get into... and you have the earlier Achron and the Tzlach, and then we get into the Chazon Ish and Rabbi Chaim Noah and the fun stuff. So let's start off with the great debate, as you call it, the Achronim, and then we'll get into the main characters, if you will, for most people probably listening to this podcast.
Yeah, so someone might say, okay, all the Sfarim nowadays have proofs exactly what the Rambam is the Gainim, so that the story's over. But the story's not over from that, because we know the Chazon Ish wrote a whole bunch of Rabbi Chaim Noah wrote Sfarim about it. We know about the Tzlach, and we know about the Gain and the Chazon. We can't just ignore them and say, okay, we found out and that's over. We can't rely on that unless we deal with their proofs. There was Gedolei Yisrael that had very different Shiurim. Unless we examine what's their proofs, why do they say that, and deal with that, we can't just rely on what the Rambam says. So we have to examine what were the Shiurim that eventually. Today we know it because we, like I say, we have the coins and everything. But there came a point in time that the stands were changed, and the way coins were said, people lost touch. So Rabbi Chaim Noah says the Sfarim never lost touch. But the Ashkenazim in Ashkenaz and Europe, certainly they lost touch, and they had to make their own examinations, and that's where they came out. That's where all Shiurim come from, the different topic comes from. So we got to examine what it's all. So, what's most famous is the Tzlach, but there is Shiurim beforehand of early Achronim, the Shach, the Taiz Yantif. Well, the Tzlach is stressing the Taiz Yantif Shiurim, and he says he's not doesn't want to be makel against the Taiz Yantif Shiurim. They were so accepted, and he's only being chayshish that maybe it's wrong. But what was accepted until then was the Taiz Yantif. So we have the Shach Shiurim, Taiz Yantif Shiurim, and the Magen Avraham brings from the Sma, and basically, in short, the Shach and the Taiz Yantif Shiurim, like a Revius, is about less than 69 cc, right? And according to the Magen Avraham brings the Sma, it's about a little less than 75 cc. That was the Shiurim that were there before the Tzlach. The Tzlach, people in the South End were relying on the what we call a Taiz Yantif. It's not just a Taiz Yantif, it's the Yesh Neichel and the Shach. They came out with the same shir. And the Tzlach said that his experiment showed that if you measure by fingers, you measure by eggs, it comes out very different. And maybe our eggs got much smaller, and we can't rely on that. That's so we go through exactly what was the response to the Tzlach. The Tzlach had, Tzlach's Talmud. We go through the Tzlach. A number of Sfarim said the Tzlach's proofs are not a proof, and then you have the Imre Yesh is the most prominent Mechaber that not only said it's not a proof, but he wrote counter proofs, and it cannot be. The Tzlach's conclusion cannot be true, because it can't be that Yoreh Deah was that big. One of his obviously famous, outstanding proofs is from the fact that we know what a dinar is. We have, like I said, today we have all the coins, but there was also a Messiah. People need to know what a shekel was for Pidyon HaBen. Pidyon HaBen was a mitzvah that we did all the generations. So there was a Messiah, all the generations. How much silver what is 5 shekalim for Pidyon HaBen? So basically the Messiah for all the generations of what is 5 shekel Pidyon Ben does accord with pretty much with what the Rambam, what we know today is the Rambam's shear of a shekel. So then we have a Messiah of what's a shekel for Pidyon Ben. So then we know what a dinar is, a quarter of a shekel, and we know what the Rambam's 7.5 dinar are, and that fits with today's eggs. It doesn't fit with double eggs. So that the Imreish brings these. So that really started off the debate with the tzlach, and the Achronim really respond right away to the tzlach with that his proof's not a proof, or that his count, and not only that, but his counter proofs. But the Goyim seem to have been chayshish for the tzlach. The Chasam Sofer has a tshuva. Chasam Sofer feels also that the tzlach is right. So you have the tzlach and the Vilna Goyim and the Chasam Sofer all being suspecting that our eggs are half the size of the eggs of Chazal, and therefore Revius is not 1.5 eggs, but Revius is 3 eggs. So that's a good reason to be machmer and suspect that we have to be machmer. At least Gedolei Yisrael were machmer.
Also want to jump in for those not familiar. The tzlach is Niddah Yehuda.
Yeah.
So that's where we get to. That's the early Achronim and the tzlach, and then we get to Reb Chaim Noah and the Chazon Ish.
Right. So the Sefer goes to exactly what Reb Chaim knows, how the machlokes developed. The first one that really wrote about this thoroughly was the Reb Chaim Noah, and first he wrote an article about it that the Chazon Ish read and responded to. Then he wrote the Sefer and wrote a number of Svarim. Goes through the history to what Reb Chaim Noah wrote and what were his proofs. And but Reb Chaim Noah basically investigated this thoroughly, and he said what the tzlach's conclusion is absolutely not true. The eggs were never double the size of today's eggs. It's impossible. And he brought many proofs. Things didn't change like that. And so actually another thing that we'll get to that when we get to Chazon Ish, but the Chaim Noah wrote Svarim, and he not only said that the tzlach, the chashash of the tzlach, the double eggs, is absolutely not true, but he said we know what the Shiurim of the Rambam and the Goyim is, because the Beis Yosef interpreted into drams, and so the Beis Yosef knew what they were. The Beis Yosef obviously was familiar with it, and he said how many drams it is. So in the Middle Eastern countries, in the Muslim countries, they still use drams, and they still use their shear of Revius was the number of drams that says in Shulchan Aruch, and the shear of Challah was the number of drams that says in Shulchan Aruch. So they still use drams for their volume shiurim and for Pidyon Ben and for the weight shiurim. So we know the Shulchan Aruch says how many drams, so we know they're still using those drams. And then he goes to at length to prove that their Messiah is the unbroken Messiah from the time of the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch to what a dram is, and he said that's the same as the Ottoman dram that was used in the Ottoman Empire of 3.2 grams is unchanged. That's the dram. So that fits with all his research of the size of eggs and the size of barley kernels and the size of fingers and forearms and all kinds of things. He did really research, and so then he gave it based on that. He gave really specific, in grams and in centimeters and cubic centimeters. He published a sefer, and with his proofs and his really precise shiurim. So it explains what his proofs were. Then the Chazon Ish was not happy about that. Chazon Ish, is coming from the understanding that the Gedolei Yisrael in Europe, the Yoreh Deah and the Goyim and the Chasam Sofer and the Gedolei Yisrael, and that's what his father's minig was, and that's what he believed that was a minig all over Europe, that they were chayshish, that the eggs got smaller, and somebody can't come along today and say, no, it's just proven wrong. And the Chazon Ish, point by point, he tried to argue, and all the Orach Chaim knows proofs. But the proof that he found the most difficult was really what we said before from the Imre Eish, that we have a tradition we have a Messiah, a shekel, that we do the mitzvah Pidya Ben with. And then, so we know what a dinar is. We know the weight of a dinar, which is a quarter of a shekel. And then the Gainim tell us the weight of Revius. So we know the size of an egg. We know the size of Revius from that. And so it's not true that, that conforms with our eggs. So that was his biggest problem. Obviously there were really other strong points that the Chaim brought, and he struggles with that. But that was his biggest proof. And I'd say his most creative answer to that has to do with actually something that's discussed at length in the first section, which we didn't get into, is that the Gainim by the Kazayas, the Gainim say that a Kazayas is the size of an olive, and we should not worry that maybe olives got bigger, maybe olives got smaller. The reason why Shiurim were given in units of olives and eggs and dates and figs is because that's Kalas is going to Gullus, and you can't just give in units that are just accepted in one culture. You move to another culture, they don't have that units. You won't be able. People won't know. People get lost on it. Therefore, it was given in units of fruits and grains that people have everywhere, and they also use. And even if it fluctuates a little bit, that's what you do. The lush is like the Mishnah says that daita shel raya. The Mishnah says you estimate a kazayas by daita shel raya. What looks to you like a zayas, what looks to you like a beya, or gregorius, that's what it is. And the reason the Gainim say the reason is that it's like that is because the Rabbi Shalom didn't expect everybody to have measuring instruments and weights and scales and like charts with. They didn't expect them to weigh their matzah, and there's just the Rabbi Shalom expected that. What looks to you like an egg, that's a kebeya. What looks to you like a zayas, that's what it says in Shuvas HaGainim. And so the Chazon Ish understood from there that when the shear of a shekel was converted into sa'iris, into barley kernels. So even if barley kernels drastically change, the shear still sticks with barley kernels. So he claims that he suggests that barley kernels used to be much bigger. So the Rambam's shekel and the Rambam's dinar was twice the size of what we consider today a shekel. But we're still makayim the mitzvah Pidya Ben because we rely on the fact that barley kernels have shrunk from the time of Chazal until now. They got half the size. And he brings this to a guy and that he goes by whatever it is today. That's all it is. So this is a big chiddush to Chazon Ish, and this is, it's again, it's you're not going to, I can't go through the whole thing on a podcast, but we're giving you a taste of it. And it explains the Chazon Ish's position and how he dealt with those rayas. And his conclusion is that we still don't know. You can't prove one way or the other. The Tzedak said it's a suffix, and Kedai said it's a suffix, and Chaim did not resolve that suffix. We still have to be machmer. And he also he gave exact shiurim for what he believed was a revius and an aimer and a tefach and everything. So that's why we ended up with Reb Chaim Notis shiurim and Chazon Ish's shiurim. And then the next chapter is about the stipler. So Chazon Ish wrote a kuntris on this. And there's some letters from him, and there's a kuntris. But the stipler wrote svarim on it. The stipler really, it's very fascinating that it's out of character, it seems, because he wasn't a paisik. His svarim are alumnus, and it wasn't his thing. He wasn't really writing. Doesn't really write on halacha l'maisa, and he didn't write tshuvas, he didn't write psakim. That's not what he did. But he felt very strongly about this, and the Sefer tries to avoid this and not get it too much into it, but it became really personal. He really took it personally, that he thought it was like a chutzpah. It was, people would just say that all the Gedailim and they not like to just say that it's not even a suffix anymore, and you don't have to worry about this. He took it very to heart, and he felt that it's really something he had to stick up for the Chazon Ish and argue, fight, and he took this. He fought. He wrote very strongly, and Rabbi Chaim wrote very strongly against him. And the Chaim and the Chazon Ish did not have like a person. It wasn't personal, but with this type, it was personal, and it was very, 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 very strong debate. So we go through what was.
And I want to say also the publication history. You should mention here the back and the forth, because as you mentioned the Chazon Ish, then Chaim wrote against back. So then the Stipler publishes in 1948 Shiurim Deraisa. Then Reb Chaim Noah publishes 1940 Shuri Tzir, and then the Stipler comes back with Ifat Tzedek, and then Reb Chaim Noah writes Shir Mikvah, and then after they both die, then the Stipler comes to Shur and Shul Torah.
Right, so there's a
back and forth. There's a lot of contrasim flying and raging in this debate, and by the way, everyone is in Eretz Yisrael all the time. This is a real, this is a
like
debate. Imagine what's going on over there.
Brak.
Yeah, this is a whole raging debate over there in Eretz Yisrael.
Yeah, right. It was, so it is debate, and there's obviously we don't, so it's a lot of material in these forums. They're not easy to read, but the main points, I really, I believe I've covered the main points. That they're really the arguments that really last. Some of the arguments are really not conclusive. It seems like this, but the things that they really felt were conclusive, I've focused on the things that really have content. That each one, the arguments each one held, were really conclusive arguments. And I try to present their arguments and the counter arguments, and what we could. Today we can reflect back and we get to understand much better where they're coming from, like why they each felt that way. But like then we write that the arguments, the counter arguments, and we write very interestingly that the Minhag Yerushalayim was actually less than Rabbi Chaim Noah. And the Minhag Yerushalayim, it's famous in Shlomo Zalman and others that the Minhag Yerushalayim really they weren't nisbal from the whole thing. They just stuck to their minhag. And Rabbi Chaim Noah, they thought it's amazing sefer, but their minhag was less than Reb Chaim Noah. And they were, and you have to understand, those days, today, you're not sure, you get a big kais and you drink a lot of wine. It didn't work like that in Yerushalayim. You didn't have money for wine. The kaises were small kaises. People's kaises, they measured the old-fashioned way, 1.5 eggs, the volume of 1.5 eggs, that was a kais, they had a little kais, and that was how much wine that... Reb Chaim Noah's Shira Revius was more than the standard size of a kais in Yerushalayim. And just like eat tons of matzah. It didn't work. Matzah costs money. Everything, they weren't just machmer on big things. Even you think about the shir challah. So we were, okay, we'll make 5 pounds of challah. 5 pounds of flour, it costs money. People didn't make so much challah. They just didn't have money to make so much challah. They didn't have such big shiurim. They had a Messiah on the shiurim, and it was less than Chaim Noah's. And so then, what about all those arguments? Okay, they weren't so nispal about it. They just kept doing what they were doing. But the next chapter goes into later on, as after this whole debate, the research continued, and people really, Talmidei Chacham found a lot of proof on the old coins and a lot of big archaeology, and it became unquestionable that we discovered what was the Shiurim in the time of the Goinim and the Ramam and the Rishayim. We resolved, the things we know what Chaim Noah. For example, the Ottoman dram, his like probably his biggest basis, the Ottoman dram. Well, we know what the Ottoman dram did change. We know when it changed, and we know why it changed. Today, it's I'll tell you one thing very interesting. Like today, if you want to know, let's say the Ottoman drum, the history of the Ottoman drum, it's at your fingertips. You'll find out what it used to be, why it changed, and when in the metric, there was a convention about the metric thing, then try to make it stem with the metric. We will find information. Rabbi Chaim, no, even for basic information, let's say how to convert from metric into inches and pounds, Rabbi Chaim wanted to know that. There's a letter. He wrote a letter to Europe asking someone to write him back this information. It's astounding. The most basic information today is at our fingertips. It's not, there wasn't, forget about, technology. There wasn't a library that really is accessible to him. But today, it's just accessible. So, he had to deal with what he had. And Ottoman drum, he had every reason to believe that Ottoman drum is the same it used to be. But we know it's not true today. We know the whole history on why it changed and when it changed, and it's not true. The Ottoman drum that's 3.2 grams it's a recent thing. It's in order to make it stem with the metric system that was used in Europe to convert it to that. It used to be less than that. So that's an example of a proof that it seemed once upon a time, such a solid proof, but it's just actually it's a proof the other way. It's if you want to go what the dram used to be, we know what the dram is. We actually know we have dram weights in the time of the Beis Yosef, so we have no doubt what the dram of the Beis Yosef was. So there's we really know this. So it's not a criticism. Let's just focus. There's a number of things, but let's just focus on this. Reb Chaim Noah, his questions, what was the dram of the Beis Yosef? He had he had no way of finding out factual information about that. He had to base it on, Sfarim that there's one generation, see this Sfarim quoted this, if they would have changed it, they would have he had all kinds of logical reasons to believe that it never changed. How should he know? Today, we know. There's no doubt. Today, we know. The history is there. It's accessible to anyone that wants to do a little research. That the Ottoman dram before this, was changed. At this, we know the date that it changed and why it changed. So there's the proofs that were brought one way or the other. Today we could later examine them with the benefit, maybe not greater wisdom, but just greater information. And they apply the information that's available today. And we know the truth. We know that the real Shiurim are less than Rabbi Chaim Noah's Shiurim. So then the question becomes, so it is a bit of a dilemma. Here we have the Chazon Ish and Rabbi Chaim Noah. And the problem, the fierce argument there of Rabbi Chaim Noah was that he's going against the David Yehuda and the Vilna Gaon and the Chasam Sofer and this and that. And okay, but he had his proofs. And now we're saying, oh, they're all wrong. How do you do that? Okay, so there's a chapter that deals with, that. Again, it's not, my Sefer is just collecting, it's almost all collecting from other Sfarim. It's not my own.
It's not a local Psak.
It's not a local Psak, and it's not my own arguments, really. It's, but that's the way we look at it is that yes, if they just again there's relevant to a lot of things, but if Reb Chaim Noah, if someone could come and would have been able to tell Reb Chaim Noah, here is the records, the Ottoman records when it changed. Would any rational person believe he would have stuck to what his thing? He would have been so happy. He would have been thrilled. Okay, now we know what the dram of the Beis Yosef. If you could bring him the glass weights that have dates on it from the time of the Beis Yosef that are dram, and he would actually have those, that's what he would rely on. There's no question about it. So if you have the information that these earlier Gedalim were looking for, and there's no question, that's what we know that they would have believed that's the emes. That's the way to go. So, all right, that's something to see, how great people view this, and there's a chapter on that. then that's pretty much the second section of the Sefer.
Right, and certainly don't pass an halacha from a podcast, as we gave the disclaimer at the Zmanim episode, but of course here as well, this is for informational purposes only, and for those interested in learning more about the sugya, definitely should purchase the book and check it out. Then you also have a chart, you have all the different shittas laid out, in the beginning, in the middle, you have all of that. Now you also have archaeology, which is something we discussed in the beginning, how you incorporate that, how you use that. And you discuss Rabbi Michael Tukachinsky and others who I think he's famous for every, what times is the fast end? Oh, Rav Tukachinsky's man or Moshe Feinstein. He became like the fast guy in America. Oh, the fast is over earlier. No one knows who he is or what he was doing. So he also, of course, has on Shiurim as well. For those familiar with him, and familiar with many of his farm, Orach Chaim on Avelos, and many of his farm, he's of course very famous. As Manam, he was a very important Paisik and lived in Eretz Yisrael. So this is a very important person. But
actually, he has a lot of famous farm, but he has 5 volumes of a sefer that's not that famous, Orach Chaim, which is full of fascinating things with this type of real, research things about Eretz Yisrael and Yerushalayim, and it's really and one of the things that's fascinating about it is that he takes a research from Goyish archaeologists and researchers, and he says, Conrad Schick says this and this in his book, and this and this. He takes reports from the non-Jewish researchers, and he analyzes and he accepts, who's right, who's wrong. But it's full of, he was looking for the emes, and he had no problem looking wherever he could find that emes, and he didn't just take anybody's word for it, but he unabashedly quotes the Goyish researchers by name and what he saw by them, and he uses this information to try to figure out factual information of that's relevant to halacha. And so this is obviously one of the topics that discussed in Orach Chaim is Shiurim, and factual proof to it.
Yeah, so that's something that you go through, and you bring in the different shittas, and you break down the different opinions and the different shittas practically. More than the shittas, the archaeological different opinions. So you go and you discuss in that section Josephus' Shiurim, Chizkiyahu's Amo, the Amos Varabayas, the archaeologist Tefach, the Mikvah Masada you discussed in Shalom, as you mentioned before, and other practical archaeological information that we have now.
Right. So this is besides the value for the topic of Shiurim. It's fascinating, and it also has other applications, because what these Sfarim are there. Okay, so what they're trying to, one of the proofs that Chazon Ish and Stipe talk about is the wall of Harabayas. The wall of Harabayas is, the Mishnah says, is 500 amas by 500 amas, and they went. We can measure the southern wall of Harabayas today, and if it's 500 amas, so amas is close to the Chazon Ish's shear. That is a proof. So, in order to decide if that's a proof or not, we have to delve into what is the wall of that we see there today. This is a big issue. And Kaczynski thoroughly analyzes this. What are the walls that we see today surrounding Harabayas? The Mishnah says that the walls of Harabayas were 500 amas by 500 amas. The walls we see today are not even square, and they're certainly not 500 amas. North to south, certainly not 500 amas. So what happened over there? So the Kaczynski discussed that, and there's 2 chapters that analyze that and bring his analysis and other Gedalim's analysis, and that's fascinating. That is fascinating because we discover what's going on in Harabayas, and we find that there's really remnants of walls from the first Beis Hamikdash that are still there. And there's also about Chizkiyahu's Amid, it's from the Shalom tunnel, which is fascinating. It's not such a long chapter, but there's actually there's a tunnel that was built, that was still there. You could walk through it. You go to Shalom to Yoreh Deah. You could walk through that water channel that was dug by Chizkiyahu. It has the whole story there, and it says in there how chiseled in from the time of Chizkiyahu how many amas long it was. So Tikinchinsky, this deals with that. That's a proof to the size of Amma, and so then these are really solid proofs to the Amma. That it accords with the Gainim and the Rambam's Shita. And the last archaeological proof is from the mikveh Masada, which is really a fascinating story about the mikveh that was discovered in Masada, and those, after he explains the whole story of Masada, what was there, what was happening in the mikveh, and why the mikveh Masada of all mikvehs was built, at a minimum shear. Generally, mikvahs are not built for practical reasons at a minimum shear, but in Masada is out in the desert, and water was a concern. And it explains the whole, how mikvahs deal with the water, changing water, and why the mikveh Masada was built. We could see clearly it was built kalacha, the way according to Shulchan Aruch, the way we build mikvahs today. But it was built at a pretty minimal shear, and we could measure that. We see that it was meticulously built kalacha, and the shear of the mikveh is not like the Chazon Ish, is not like the doubled eggs. So that is actually, one of the haskamas that my sefer is Rabbi David Cohen, and Rabbi David Cohen writes in his haskama about this that when this proof came out to smaller shiurim, he asked Rav Gussman, is this a proof? Should we rely on this to paskin like the smaller shiurim? Because you see from the mikveh Masada. He said absolutely. The issue was settled now. We have tangible proof. And he told him that Reb Chaim also didn't worry about the smaller, bigger shiurim. That's what it says in the letter of David Cohen. So there's a chapter that goes through exactly the story of the mikveh Masada and what was found there and what's the shir and what we could deduce from there. That's pretty much what's in the section about archaeological proof.
Before we get to the end, which is informed shiurim. So now we went through all this, you went through all the shittas, even though you started in the beginning with the shittas of Rambam Megainim, but now come to the end after all the back and forth, all the history, or the archaeology, all the definitions, and then the lumdis, nalacha, informed shiurim, which is at the end of the day.
Right. It's informed shiurim because today, not only do we know the Rambam and the Gainim, but we know what the Shach and the Magen Avraham and the Sma were saying. We know what the Orach Chaim was saying. We know what those weights were in Islam in Europe. So we know what actually the Chayyim says was the shear of and what we could now today we able to we know all those the units that were used. It wasn't known. Today we know what was done in Europe, what the Mishnah Berurah says was the minig in Europe, what the Orach Chaim says was the minig in Europe, and we know there's all stems with the smaller shiurim, and so it goes through what we actually know, not only from the Gainim and Rishonim, but we know what do the Paiskim say before the real debate erupted because we people simply didn't know what were the points that the Magen Avraham was talking about. And also it goes through what's the applications. There's a lot of you think it's only kulas then. Oh, okay, everything you just have you don't only have to get a small amount for exayas, and you only have a small amount for revius, but it's important. There's also chumras that come from it. There's by knowing the right size, it's not just kulas. There's a lot of dikta mitzvahs that we could do. Much more, we could make mitzvahs much more bediktuk if we actually know the accurate shiurim. So it goes through, how that affects kiyama mitzvahs, and also about shekel. It goes through how much is a ksuba worth. It is pretty amazing that almost nobody knows what a ksuba is worth. Everybody goes, it says this, and Taisus ksuba, and this, and you ask someone, not the chassan, not the kala, not the Masada Kedushin, like, okay, how much did I just sign up for? What does it say over there? What are Messiah's kukim kesef? So, but today we know what it is. So it goes through a lot of interesting practical applications to Pidyon Ben and Ksuva and making Kiddush and Mafrosh's Challah and and obviously what's Kazayas, what's Revius, Bachachrein and Mitzvahs, and what's the Tefach and what's an Amma. And now Sukkos is coming up, and the Tefach and the Amma, we got to know the Tefach and the Amma. It's really relevant to know.
Yeah, and you can explain a little bit more why. I mean, I'm sure many listeners are familiar why, but if you want to elaborate a little bit.
Well, obviously, Hadassim, Aravis, Alolav, it's, you got to know the Shir is a Tefach. Okay, so today, Baruch Hashem, we don't have to get the littlest Alolav and the littlest Hadassim, but, when you check your Hadassim, you got to know what a Tefach is. But for Sukkah, it's really kind of not relevant. First of all, just the Mechitza is 10 Tefachim, which, is surprisingly is relevant to a lot of things. It's relevant to Micah and it's relevant to Sukkah. Sometimes, let's say it's relevant to know if you're the fence on the side of your deck is really a mechitza and everything else is not really necessary. So is it 10 tefachim or not? You got to know what a tefach is. And sometimes you have to know what's a loved and what's daifan akuma. Sometimes, you think you have daifan akuma is relevant a lot of times. You have the side of the sukkah, it's not kosher schach. So you're allowed four amis of not kosher schach. It's still considered, you still have that wool of daifan akuma. But you can't just use the biggest shiurim of amma for that. Maybe you're used to using the biggest shear, but here it comes out of cooler to use that. You have to know what is really the shear. You can't just pick a bigger shear. If the truth is, if there's much proof that Am is even less than Orach Chaim says, well, you got to be careful on your Daifan Akuma that can know the right shear. So so building a sukkah and Arba Minim, of course, even let's say, you're supposed to eat a kabeya of sukkah. It's just a chi of sukkahs or kabeya, and you're supposed to eat a kabeya when you make a bracha. What's a kabeya? Some people like overdo it, and especially you want to machmir one thing. People are telling their family and the kids, you got to keep eating it, keep eating. Well, know what you're talking about, and I'll actually find out what it is. It's you'd be surprised if you actually know what it is and how much it is. You'd be surprised. It's important to know what's the truth. What is the kabeya?
That's more relevant in many ways to Pesach, when people are just wolfing down, stuffing down matzah, like one matzah, two matzah. It's not enough. Kazayas, and they have to keep eating matzahs, and the kurach, and the morah, and it's just like eating, and there's different shiurim for each one, but that's a whole different thing, right? Each one. Right. But then they're just like, keep going, just machmer. So it's like, that's also where it's, what are the different shittas, and what are we paskin like, or what are you specifically paskin like, rather than just keep on endlessly eating. Not everybody can endlessly just eat matzah without any repercussions.
Yeah, and here the thing is, inform people know that Gedalim didn't do this. The Hilchos Chaim didn't do it. Rabbi Feinstein didn't eat like this. The Chazon Ish didn't eat those huge Chazon Ish. No, he didn't eat a half a matzah for Kazayas. The Steifler didn't do that.
Half a matzah. Whole matzah, some people eating.
Yeah, well, no. The Chazon Ish and the Steifler didn't. The Gedalim didn't do that. Nobody did that. I don't say nobody did that. Maybe the Brisker, I don't know, but it wasn't. It wasn't done. It's a modern thing. No, but Rabbi Feinstein didn't do that. Nobody's Zaydis. Generally, your Zaydis and Alta Zaydis did not do that. It's a modern thing. And inform people know that these huge shiurim that you'll find, in charts and things. It wasn't done, and there's very little basis for it.
I think that has a statement that applies to all chumras when it comes to chumras, right? There's no kunst to be machmer, the kunst to be mekel. Nowadays, everything is just be machmer and dig up new sheets. So that's even a different thing. Here is just you're saying it's like going with the.
You can't knock chumras. You knock chumras, you're gonna lose half your clientele. People don't want to hear.
I'm not knocking chumras. We're saying here that you should be an informed. Not listener. Again, this is not a halacha podcast. We are not paskening. I'm not a posek. I'm not qualified to say it. But it's just be informed. Like I say, go through, understand the sugya, understand the shittas, and then go ask your Rav, whatever it is. But just understand what you're doing. Don't just do it like because that's what I think or whatever it is. Understand like you do with Zmanim. Understand what the concepts mean, what the different opinions are, and what's going on. So I think that's something. So to end off, what are you trying to accomplish with the Sefer? Is that what you're trying to accomplish, to inform the reader and the listener of what the different opinions are, what those terms mean, and that they should know what's going on?
Yeah, they should know. Like to say, there's like I start off. There's a lot of confusion to this. Like, where does it come from? And where is this big? I want should I be machmer? Hey, I want to make sure I'm doing the mitzvah. But where does it come from? And more important is people are aware that informed people today, chashuv rabbanim today know that it's just not, these big shiurim are just not right. They're not true. It's not accurate. It's not realistic. And how do we know that? I mean, how can we rely on that? So to just, it's hard to just rely, when we know that there's people that have this big shiurim, just to say, rely on something smaller, you have to be really informed. So the really informed people today know that the big shiurim are not realistic. But the average person today wants to be confident about that. He wants to understand how do we know that? So you read the Sefer, you'll know how today it's what was the most striking thing about this is, and a lot of people are aware that we learned something in this past generation that wasn't known a number of generations before. We know where the confusion came from, and we know what's the truth. And before this book came out, it would have taken a lot of work to clarify, like, how do we know that, and what do we do with all the opinions that say otherwise? It gives anyone it's not easy reading. It's going to take some toil, like the last Sefer. But thousands of people enjoy my last Sefer, and thousands of people will enjoy this Sefer. They'll be able to really inform themselves and get clear and geschmack a whole amazing sugya that's tied in with so many archaeology and history and so many amazing things.
Bez Hashem. So who would you say this Sefer, which is written in English again, who would you say it's meant for?
It's meant for any Ben Torah or Talmid Chacham that wants to be informed, as practical. Well, first of all, any Talmid Chacham Ben Torah that wants to be informed what, a relevant halacha, what's a kazayas, what's a tefa, what's a amish, just to know where does it come from. That's the first thing. And second, it's just someone who enjoys learning. If you enjoy learning, you will love the Sefer because it's challenging, it's interesting, it's fascinating. It takes effort, and you, at the end of the day, you will really learn a geschmack sugya in a beautiful way. And not only do you know Shiurim, but like I said before, you know a lot of Gemara is much better.
We had the great Zmanim debate, the great Shiurim debate. What debate is next?
So since I've gotten such amazing feedback, I know I got to keep writing. Because people appreciate it. And I think these, for what's halacha l'maisa, these two topics of Zmanim and Shiurim are really unique. And I don't have another topic that has like relevant l'maisa, but there are topics that are really amazing, interesting, difficult sugyas that are intertwined with like history and science and things, and information that are also would be amazing to read. And the thing that I'm working next on, I've begun on, it's a lot of work, but I've begun, is about the luach. The rules today, how we decide what months are Moli and what's a Chasar and when Rosh Hashanah is. Where does it come from? Who made it up? What's the reason for the rules? It's really a fascinating topic that there's not so much written about it, because what's really, people just rely on the calendar makers to tell them what it is. They don't know what's behind it. They don't write so much about it. But the Ga'ayim and the earlier Shaim did write a lot about it, and they argued about a lot of points. And the things they argued about, some of it has to do with just astronomy and even just like the size of the world and the shape of the world and interesting things like that. And people debated these things, and it's a very fascinating topic. What Ga'ayim and Rishonim said, the reasons for this and the source of this and who made it up. And that's Mitzvah Shem. We'll get another sefer on that.
Okay, looking forward. So I will link in the show notes. Those interested can purchase it. via wherever you're interested in, on Amazon or your local Svarim store. Also, mosaicpress.com. And as always, if you use code CHATTER, CHATTER, you can get 15% off the Great Shiurim debate, the Great Zman debate, all books on mosaic.com with that code. So for those interested, you can check it out. And thank you, Rabbi Notis, for joining me once again.
Thank you, Nachi. Appreciate it.